Deep beneath the crushing weight of the Midnight Zone swims the ultimate titan of the abyss. A 60-ton apex predator engineered by millions of years of evolution to fear absolutely nothing. For centuries, humanity believed these monsters ruled the dark unchallenged. We were wrong. Deep in the freezing blackness, the king does not die of old age. It is hunted, not by a larger leviathan, but by a thread-like phantom, a creature with no eyes, no mouth, and a terrifying hunger that defies the laws of biology. It doesn't stalk the flesh. It liquefies the very foundation of the ocean's giants from the inside out, turning their unbreakable armor into ash. A silent executioner waiting in the graveyard of the deep. How does the ocean's most ruthless killer lose a war to a ghost it cannot even see? The secret buried at the bottom of the world changes everything. To understand the horror of the feast, you must first look at these deep-sea titans not as animals, but as biomechanical dreadnoughts. Take the sperm whale. Its skeletal architecture is a masterpiece of military-grade evolutionary engineering. The skull is a massive, solid-bone battering ram, forged to withstand a crushing hydraulic assault that would collapse a frontline naval submarine like an empty soda can. Its ribcage acts as a dynamic, interlocking blast shield, flexing under thousands of pounds of raw ocean pressure to safeguard its vital organic machinery. But the truth is, this impenetrable armor hides a hyper-targeted vulnerability. These bones are far from inert stone. They are highly pressurized biological vaults, saturated with a massive payload of dense lipids, calcium, and liquid energy. It is the evolutionary equivalent of a nuclear bunker constructed out of pure fuel and gold. For a century, this heavy ballistic plating ensures the living Leviathan remains an untouchable god of the abyss, entirely immune to the conventional weaponry of any rival apex hunter. However, what makes this terrifying is how this ultimate defense instantly weaponizes against them the moment the pulse stops. When this 50-ton organic warship finally loses power and plunges into the freezing wasteland of the seafloor, its impenetrable shield turns into a catastrophic liability. The fortress becomes a beacon. Locked inside those unbreakable walls is a caloric treasure trove that no jaw can crush and no claw can tear open. The stage is set for a completely different kind of warfare, a siege against an unbreakable bunker. And lurking in the Vanta black shadows of the graveyard, an invisible enemy is already calculating the breach, preparing a silent chemical strike that will dissolve the king's legacy from the inside out. The descent of a fallen whale is not a peaceful burial. It is a multi-ton tactical payload drop into a barren abyssal desert, a 60-ton biological ballistic missile plunging through miles of liquid darkness. In this frozen wasteland, energy is the rarest currency. A single whale carcass delivers a massive, concentrated stockpile of lipids and proteins equivalent to a 50-year supply drop on a scorched earth battlefield. But the truth is, this massive influx of raw fuel triggers an immediate, violent mobilization of the deep-sea underworld. The sensory shockwave of decaying tissue radiates for miles, a chemical siren song calling the ocean's most macabre shock troops to the drop zone. Within hours, the dead titan is swarmed by biological demolition units. Sleeper sharks move in like heavy armor, using saw-like teeth to carve out massive chunks of blubber. Alongside them, armies of primitive hagfish operate like organic drill rigs, boring directly into the muscle walls and secreting suffocating sheets of slime to lock down the perimeter. They strip the carcass with the violent precision of salvagers dismantling a decommissioned warship. What makes this terrifying is the ruthless velocity of the extraction. In a matter of months, a mountain of flesh that took half a century to build is entirely vaporized by thousands of specialist jaws. Eventually, the frontline assault forces retreat into the blackness. They leave behind a stark, skeletal white fortress resting silently in the abyssal mud. Every shred of soft tissue is gone, stripped clean down to the bare, calcified matrix. Conventional scavengers must abandon the field. Their jaws are entirely useless against the dense structural concrete of the whale's skeleton. However, this is not the end of the siege, but a terrifying tactical transition. The ultimate prize, the oil-rich marrow sealed inside those ballistic-grade vaults, remains untouched. The heavy artillery has failed, but out in the dark, the true master of this deep-sea heist is deploying a chemical weapon that bypasses physical armor entirely. Look closely at the bleached, mineralized fortress of the whale's skeleton. At first glance, it seems utterly deserted. Then, tens of thousands of delicate, crimson tendrils erupt from the stone like a blooming meadow of miniature sea flowers swaying gracefully in the freezing currents. But the truth is, this elegant garden is a deployed network of biological infiltration units. Scientists call them Osedax, the zombie worm. They are the ultimate asymmetrical warfare specialists of the abyss. Like a stealth unit invading a heavily fortified military outpost, they do not bring battering rams, heavy artillery, or serrated teeth. Instead, they conquer through absolute, terrifying anatomical minimalism. Scan the design of this invader, and you will find a glaring tactical contradiction. There are no eyes to lock onto a target, no jaws to crush minerals, no stomach to digest prey. The Osedax is a faceless, gutless strip of fragile tissue barely the width of a needle. By all conventional laws of evolutionary combat, this creature should be entirely defenseless. However, the total absence of these traditional predatory weapons is exactly what makes them an unstoppable biological threat. They do not need to pierce the outer ballistic armor with brute force, because they are engineered to bypass physical defense parameters entirely. They don't chew the fortress, they dissolve it. While those feathery red plumes waves in the open water, acting like a radar array for oxygen exchange, the real horror unfolds completely out of sight. The base of the worm morphs into a subterranean green root system that bores directly into the calcified matrix. It is an organic drilling rig, anchoring itself deep within the king's final defense line. What makes this terrifying is that this fragile, mouthless thread is secretly housing a weaponized chemical payload capable of neutralizing the hardest substance known to marine biology. The perimeter has been breached. The faceless phantom is now locked onto the bone marrow, quietly priming a microscopic sabotage that will liquefy this multi-ton vault from the inside out. The Osedax roots do not absorb water. They deploy high-velocity chemical warfare. Deep inside the green burrowing tissue, specialized cellular machinery known as proton pumps ignite, blasting a relentless torrent of concentrated acid directly into the bone matrix. This is not slow environmental decay. It is a violent, targeted chemical demolition. The acid aggressively barks through calcium phosphate, the exact material that engineered the whale's bones to survive thousands of pounds of ocean pressure. Think of an industrial salvage crew pouring highly concentrated acid onto a massive limestone monument, watching it instantly fizzle and dissolve into sludge. But the truth is, breaching this calcified fortress is only the opening salvo of a much deeper invasion. Once the outer mineral shield is melted away, a massive tactical contradiction presents itself. Sealed inside the bone lies a priceless vault of rich lipids and dense collagen. Yet, the Osedax possesses no stomach, no intestines, and no internal organs to process this prize. By all laws of biological survival, the heist should stall right here. However, what makes this terrifying is the hidden syndicate operating within the invader's own flesh. Packed inside the worm's root systems are billions of weaponized symbiotic bacteria from the Océano order. They act as an elite microscopic refinery crew. The moment the acid liquefies the bone, these specialized microbes swarm the compound, rapidly dismantling complex fats and pumping streamlined, pre-digested nutrients directly into the worm's bloodstream. It is a flawlessly automated biological pipeline. The leviathan's indestructible legacy is being systematically erased, molecule by molecule, leaving behind nothing but a hollowed-out, brittle husk. And out in the crushing blackness, the feast has only just begun. When marine biologists first mapped these abyssal executioners, they hit a baffling tactical wall. They cataloged thousands of active Osedax units, yet every single specimen weaponizing acid against the bone matrix was female. No males could be found anywhere on the battlefield. It looked like a critical strategic flaw, an army incapable of reinforcing its own numbers. But the truth is, the male forces were not missing. they had already executed the ultimate deep cover biological infiltration. The males are not independent combatants. They are microscopic phantoms, permanently stalled in a larval state, completely stripped of eyes, roots, or feeding machinery. Instead, up to hundreds of these tiny biological drones live parasitically inside the female's own anatomy, packed tightly within the gelatinous mucus sheath that wraps around her egg tube. It is the evolutionary equivalent of an ammunition factory welded directly into the firing chamber of a battleship. What makes this terrifying is the absolute ruthless efficiency of this anatomical design. The female never wastes vital energy scouting the barren, vantablack desert of the seafloor to find a mate. She is a self-contained colonization weapon, carrying an entire reproductive battalion right beneath her skin. The moment her acid roots breach a whale's calcified vault, this internal factory ignites into overdrive. Fueled by the non-stop microscopic fertilization happening inside her flesh, the female transforms into a high-velocity biomortar, launching a relentless barrage of embryonic spores into the deep-sea currents. Think of a stealth drone deployment system that continuously floods an entire continent with invisible dormant landmines. However, the true psychological horror of this endless production line is its unstoppable, infinite cycle. These microscopic invaders float blindly through the abyss, riding the deep currents like an airborne pathogen. They are waiting, listening for the chemical shockwave of the next falling king, ready to colonize the next grave, before the body even turns cold. Why would a living apex predator, cruising the upper water columns with lethal grace, have an evolutionary reckoning with a microscopic worm miles below? But the truth is, this isn't a battle for flesh. It is a war of absolute structural erasure. In the deep ocean, dense bone is a long-term tactical stronghold, a biological monument built to endure for up to a century. Yet the Osedax acts like an automated data wipe virus. Its relentless acid deployment doesn't just scavenge. It aggressively re-engineers the calcified armor into a brittle, honeycombed lattice that shatters under the slightest current. Within years, an indestructible legacy is reduced to a formless cloud of dust. For decades, science believed this chemical assault was strictly restricted to the dead. However, a terrifying shift in target acquisition has recently been uncovered. Evolutionary variations of this faceless phantom have upgraded their biological breaching mechanisms. They no longer wait for the kill. Deep-sea explorers have documented related strains actively mounting onto the living, hardened carapaces of deep-diving sea turtles, anchoring their acidic root systems into viable, pulsing tissue. It is the biological equivalent of a magnetic hull mine clamping onto an active, patrolling warship, silently burning through the armor plating while the vessel is still in motion. What makes this terrifying is how this biochemical weapon ruthlessly exploits any breach in an apex predator's perimeter. When a living shark or whale descends into the gloom with an open battle wound, it carries a chemical beacon. The drifting embryonic spores of these worms can infiltrate the exposed lacerations, bypassing the living skin to target the vulnerable bone matrix beneath. The ultimate hunter is instantly transformed into an active incubator for its own undoing. The line between the passive scavenger and the active aggressor has been completely blurred, leaving the kings of the deep entirely exposed to an enemy that doesn't care if its prey is still breathing. To watch the feathery red plumes of the Osedax blanket a leviathan's grave is to witness what looks like absolute biological vandalism. Their corrosive green root networks act as subterranean demolition charges, aggressively melting down the majestic architecture of the deep. But the truth is, this scorched earth demolition is actually the ultimate resource recovery operation in the abyssal theater of war. Without this relentless chemical siege, the deep ocean would plunge into a catastrophic supply chain gridlock. Imagine a global military superpower locking all of its fuel, titanium, and raw materials inside impenetrable underground bunkers, leaving its active frontline forces to starve. That is the exact threat of a world without the zombie worm. Over millions of years, billions of tons of critical tactical assets, calcium, phosphorus, and high-energy lipids, cocky drab building blocks of life, would be locked away. Vince inside an immortal graveyard of skeletal concrete. However, what makes this terrifying is how close the deep-sea ecosystem constantly hovers to absolute starvation. The deep ocean is an energetic desert. If the raw materials bound in these bones remain hoarded, the entire marine food web faces a permanent systemic collapse. The Osedax is the only weapon capable of breaking this mineral lockdown. By weaponizing their proton pumps, they don't just dissolve the king's armor, they liberate it. The micro-refineries inside their roots break the molecular gridlock, converting dead-end bones into a massive, free-flowing payload of vital nutrients that floods back into the abyssal water column. This chemical recycling reboots the system, feeding the bacteria, refueling the scavengers, and ultimately spawning the next generation of apex predators. They are the ruthless logistical engineers of the deep, turning an organic graveyard into a burning reactor of pure life. Yet, a chilling mystery still echoes in the freezing blackness. The survival of every living leviathan above depends entirely on the non-stop, horrifying efficiency of a faceless phantom that thrives solely on the dead. We measure abyssal supremacy by the crushing impact of a sperm whale's jaw or the razor-sharp tactical arsenal of an apex shark. But the truth is, brute kinetic force is a primitive weapon. The ultimate victor of the deep is a mouthless, gutless thread. Its pulsing crimson palps act as a deceptive sensory radar, while its microscopic proton pumps deploy a devastating acid payload that completely bypasses ballistic hide. Like a stealth cyberweapon silently bricking a multi-billion-dollar nuclear carrier from within. This tiny phantom achieves total structural annihilation without ever striking a single physical blow. It doesn't outmuscle the kings. It outlasts them, waiting in the Vanta Black silence to liquefy their very memory. What makes this terrifying is the realization that no amount of evolutionary armor can protect you from an enemy that conquers through absolute non-existence. The throne is empty, and the true master of the abyss is already waiting. The crushing, silent currents of the Midnight Zone carry a truth that extends far beyond the bleached bones of fallen leviathans. In our world, as in the upper oceans, we spend our existence worshipping the loud, the massive, and the aggressively dominant, mistaking brute force for permanent survival. Yet, the abyss whispers a completely different law of existence. True resilience does not belong to the ballistic armor that fights the pressure, but to the fragile thread that yields to it. The Osedax does not wage a war of teeth and claws. It simply waits in the shadows, quietly dissolving the monuments of absolute power back into the primordial soup from which they were born. It is a haunting cosmic reminder that nature tolerates no permanent gods and hoards no eternal empires. In the grand, unyielding ledger of time, the fierce mechanics of dominance will always fracture, utterly outlasted by the patient architects of surrender and return. When the final titan falls and the echoes of the living world go cold, it is never the jaw that gets the last word. It is the phantom waiting in the dark,